Hey there, folks. Buckle up for a wild ride as we dive into a tale of a tough-as-nails bounty hunter, some serious warrants on his head, and a deal from the US military that's too good to pass up. This movie kicks off with a scene from the Civil War in the 1860s, back when the United States was going through a big fight. There's a guy named Jonah Hex, who's part of the army. He's asked by his boss, Quentin Turnbull, to burn down a hospital in North America. However, Jonah refuses and confronts his boss, fighting back against him. In the midst of all this, Jonah unintentionally ends up causing the death of Turnbull's son Jeb. Turnbull isn't happy at all. He gets mad and takes Jonah and his family as prisoners. He even kills Jonah's wife and kid right in front of him while he's tied up. And as if that wasn't enough, Turnbull burns Jonah's cheek with a hot iron, making him look all messed up. Then he leaves Jonah still tied up. After going through all this terrible stuff, Jonah is determined to never forget what happened and to get back at Turnbull for what he did. A few days later, they found Jonah tied up and really sick. A group of Native Americans called the Crow tribe found him. One of their wise elders did a special ceremony that made Jonah better, and it also gave him a strange new power, talking to dead people. When he got better, Jonah started his journey to find Turnbull. But then he got some news. Turnbull had died in a fire. So Jonah couldn't get his revenge anymore. Instead, he became a guy who kills people for money. One day, he brought 3 bodies to a little town called Stunk Creek. He was supposed to give the bodies to the sheriff, who hired him for the job. But things went wrong. The sheriff didn't want to pay Jonah the money he promised. Instead, the sheriff wanted to kill Jonah. There were posters everywhere saying that whoever catches and kills Jonah would get a reward of $500. Jonah wasn't going to give up without a fight. He didn't want to die just like that. So he fought against the sheriff and his guys who came after him. Not too far from the city, something else was happening. There was this big train from the American Army. It was carrying parts for weapons they had just bought, but some horse-riding guys came and took over the train. They scared everyone on the train and even went into the soldiers' part. They even said they'd blow everything up if the soldiers fought back. After a while, the robbers let go of the passenger cars and then made them blow up with a big bomb. They did this on purpose so they could take all the weapons from the train. They were planning to use those weapons to fight against the United States. Unexpectedly, Turnbull was leading this group of robbers. He pretended to be dead so Jonah wouldn't chase after him. Time went by, and the news about the train robbery got to the President of the United States, Grant. After Lieutenant Grass told the President that Turnbull was alive and that he was going to use the stolen weapons to attack the United States on July 4th, which was a big deal because it was the country's 100th birthday. When Grant heard this, he sent Lieutenant Grass to find Jonah. He had a plan to use Jonah to fight against Turnbull and his group. On the flip side, Jonah's in a bar, and he has to defend himself by killing a guy who's trying to hurt him. After that, he goes to see a woman named Lila Black, who works as a prostitute. She's interested in him and even invites Jonah to go with her. Later on, when Jonah is getting ready to leave, Grass and his group of soldiers barge into the room. They tell Jonah that the President, Grant, wants him to join the military. Jonah isn't too keen on the idea at first, but then Grass drops a bombshell. Turnbull is alive. That changes everything for Jonah. He decides to join the United States military so he can go after Turnbull. Grass takes Jonah to a military base. There, they've caught one of the guys who helped rob the train, but he's dead now. This makes it hard to find Turnbull, but Jonah can talk to the dead. So he uses his power to temporarily bring the robber back to life. He asks the robber about Turnbull. Turns out the robber didn't know much. He was hired by Jonah's old boss, Slocum, not Turnbull. After getting this info, Jonah lets the guy go, and he dies again shortly after. Down in Charleston, South Carolina, something shady is going on. Turnbull is having a meeting with a guy named Adelman Lusk. Lusk has been secretly helping Turnbull with his bad deeds. During the meeting, Turnbull asks Lusk about a bunch of super dangerous weapons that the government has hidden away. But Lusk isn't on board with Turnbull's plan to use these weapons to attack America. He refuses to spill the beans. Turnbull doesn't take no for an answer, though. He tries to scare Lusk into talking. Eventually, Lusk spills the beans and tells him where the weapons are. No time wasted. Turnbull and his crew hurry off to this secret place where the American weapons are stashed. When they get there, Turnbull manages to find a chemical ball that can set off a huge explosion. This ball was made by a guy named Eli Whitney, who's an inventor. In the evening, Jonah heads over to an underground fight. He's looking for Slocum, who's now running the whole thing. Jonah wants to know where Turnbull is. When he asks Slocum about it, Slocum starts messing with him. He says Turnbull is dead and even makes a joke about Jonah's own past, mentioning Jeb's death. Jonah gets really mad hearing that. He pulls out a gun and points it at Slocum. Slocum's buddies try to intervene, but Jonah easily takes one of them down. Then he tosses that guy into the fighting pit, where a part monster gladiator is doing his thing. The monster dude attacks anyone who gets near. Before leaving, Jonah also manages to rescue a dog from a bunch of guys who were hurting it. Because of this big brawl, the whole illegal fight place catches fire. It all starts because one of the guys there lit a torch, and things got out of control. Meanwhile, the dog that Jonah rescued finally tag along with Jonah to Jeb's grave. Jonah actually manages to bring Jeb back to life by digging him up. Jonah apologizes to Turnbull's son for killing him back then. Jeb, in turn, owns up to his own mistakes. He spills the beans about where Turnbull is hiding, a place called Fort Resurrection, which is a military spot. Before Jonah puts Jeb back in the grave, he has to kill him again. Jeb gives Jonah a little reminder. He tells Jonah that all the people he's killed are waiting for him in the afterlife. With the info on where Turnbull is, Jonah goes to see a guy named Smith who runs a weapon shop. He wants to gear up before taking on Turnbull. Smith hooks him up with a top-notch weapon that it can take out 10 people with just one shot. When the sun went down, Jonah reached Fort Resurrection, the hiding spot of Turnbull. He discovered that Turnbull was working on a dangerous weapon using the explosives stored there. Soon enough, he came face to face with Turnbull himself. But things didn't go as planned because Turnbull's sidekick, Burke, stepped in and started fighting Jonah. Unfortunately, Burke managed to shoot Jonah and knock him down. Burke figured Jonah was done for, so he took off, leaving Jonah behind. Even though Jonah was hurt, he was still conscious and managed to escape into the nearby forest. The next morning rolled around, and Turnbull was in charge. He told his crew to move all the guns onto a ship so that Jonah wouldn't come back to mess with their base. He also had a plan to get to Jonah by kidnapping someone close to him, using that person as a hostage. Meanwhile, Jonah was in bad shape after being shot by Burke. He was on the brink of dying, and he started having strange visions where he was fighting Turnbull. Eventually, he passed out. On the other side, Turnbull got busy. He started his attack by throwing cannonballs around, and then he used a special chemical ball that caused a huge explosion. This explosion killed a lot of people in a small town. President Grant got wind of the attack and got really worried. He was anxious because Jonah hadn't given any updates about where Turnbull's hideout was. At the same time, Burke showed up at a brothel. He took Layla, who was close to Jonah, and made her a hostage. Meanwhile, out in the woods, Jonah was in really bad shape, almost dying. But the Crow Indians found him again and did a special ceremony to make him better. After he got well, Jonah rushed to get an important message to Washington, D.C. He wanted to warn them about Turnbull's plan to wreck the Capitol. When evening rolled around, Jonah sneaked into Virginia Pier. That's where Turnbull was planning to set sail to D.C. At the same time, Turnbull was hanging out with Adelman. Turnbull was thanking him for helping out with the plan. But Turnbull ended up killing Adelman, even though Adelman was begging for his life. Jonah managed to track down Turnbull's ship, but then Burke jumped him out of nowhere. They ended up having a big fight below the ship's deck, all sneaky so the rest of Turnbull's crew didn't know. Jonah was pretty slick in this fight. He got Burke cornered and made him smash his own head into the ship's propeller, killing him. But Jonah wasn't done. He used his strange power to bring Burke back to life, only to kill him again by burning him up. A bit later, Jonah was keeping an eye on Turnbull. Turnbull was talking to his crew, all pumped up to wreck the United States. Jonah had a plan to secretly shoot Turnbull with his rifle, but it didn't work out. Turnbull spotted Jonah and pointed out that he had Lila as a hostage. So Jonah gave up and let himself get arrested, along with Lila. Turnbull was still all about his plan to sail to DC and blow up the US Capitol. In the middle of hostage situation, Lila pulls off a surprising move. She manages to free herself, and then tells Jonah that her real name is Tallulah. She unties him, and they start hatching a plan to take down Turnbull. At the same time, some US warships show up, looking to stop Turnbull's plan. But Turnbull has these chemical bombs, which make it easy for him to attack the warships and blow them up. Meanwhile, Jonah and Tallulah start attacking Turnbull's crew on the ship. They're also trying to stop the guys who are firing at the US warships. It's tough going, because Turnbull gets in their way, and they all end up in the engine room. Tallulah's in a tight spot too, facing off against a guy who's about to attack the US warships. Then, Turnbull gives the order to fire cannons at Washington, D.C. Just when the chemical bombs are about to be launched, Jonah does something brave. He throws his axe to stop the shooting and then goes all out against Turnbull. Jonah manages to push Turnbull into the cannon's machinery. Turnbull gets stuck, and that's when Jonah saves Tallulah. He pulls her away and they jump into the sea. Right then, the chemical bomb goes off and the ship blows up, taking Turnbull and his crew down with it. The next day, Grant gave Jonah a gift, because Jonah had saved the United States from Turnbull's attack. Grant handed him some money and even offered him a job as a sheriff, but Jonah turned it down. He told Grant that he'd be there if the country needed him, but he didn't want the job. After meeting the president, Jonah made up his mind. He decided to go off with Lila, and that's how the film wraps up. The lesson from this story is, sometimes seeking revenge can lead to surprising friendships and a chance for redemption.